Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at another one of my Does This Class Suck videos, and we're going to be looking at the path of the Berserker Barbarian. This is one that gets a lot of hate online and a lot of people have tons of complaints about it. And I think a lot of those complaints are very valid, which is one reason I wanted to talk about it. But I also feel like a lot of times they're overstated. So it's not that the complaint or the criticisms don't have a lot of truth to them, but I see people talk about, barbarians who just like frenzy over and over again until their character dies of exhaustion. And that just doesn't happen in the real world. Nobody actually does that. So I think a lot of these complaints, while truthful, are also overstated. And I kind of wanted to give the class a little bit of love because I don't think it's as awful as a lot of people make it sound. Is it the best barbarian path? Probably not. In fact, I would say definitely not. But it's not as bad as a lot of people see. I see like a lot of big YouTube channels and content creators who say that it's like an F-tier class. And I don't know that any class in 5e is actually F-tier. I think that the game is pretty well balanced. And yeah, some subclasses are definitely stronger than others, but I don't think that it's as awful as a lot of people say. And if you're smart about the way you use Frenzy, I think you can really get a lot of value out of it. So I wanted to talk about, we're not going to go through all the main barbarian abilities because those are just consistent across every subclass, right? But we're going to talk about the path of the Berserker abilities. We'll talk about exhaustion, of course, and then I'll talk about like some of the things that I think you can do to get the most out of the class. So I want to state, though, right here in the beginning, that I've never actually played a Path of the Berserker Barbarian, but I was in a campaign as a player, not a dungeon master. But that campaign is the same one I played the champion fighter in, actually. Went all the way from 1 to 20, and my friend Troy played a Path of the Berserker Barbarian. And he was really good. It was a very, very, very solid class. Now, Troy didn't use Frenzy very often, and Troy also went in knowing that the path, like at this point Xanatars hadn't come out yet, so he went in knowing that the Path of the Totem Warrior was probably the stronger choice mechanically. But it just didn't fit his concept of the character. So for roleplay reasons, he just saw his guy being this like powerful berserker guy who just like went nuts and killed stuff in combat, right? So, no animal spirits, no any of that kind of stuff. So Path of the Berserker is what he chose because it just made more sense for the character. And he was really solid. In fact, I actually did a roundtable discussion video once about barbarians, and Troy was part of it. And then my other friend, Jaden, who played a Path of the Zealot Barbarian in my Whitespire campaign, which eventually went to 20 as well. It was also in that video. I think we were like 16th or 17th level, somewhere around there at the time we made the video, so they hadn't gotten to 20 yet, but eventually they did. So anyways, enough preamble, let's get into the abilities. So, Frenzy. Starting when you choose this path at 3rd level, you can go into a Frenzy when you rage. If you do so for the duration of your rage, you can make one single melee weapon attack as a bonus action on each of your turns after this one. When your rage ends, you suffer 1 level of exhaustion. So there's a few problems here, which people have pointed out, of course, which is that if you start trying to use Frenzy a fair amount, you start stacking levels of exhaustion, and stacking levels of exhaustion is terrible. Even 1 level of exhaustion kind of sucks, but stacking it is just horrific. And that's a very valid complaint. And I don't know that trading an extra bonus action attack for a level of exhaustion is always worth it. That's that's definitely a decision you're going to have to make. But I do think it's worth pointing out that if you know this is going to be your last combat of the day, or that you're going to be able to take a long rest safely after this, then it's just an extra attack around as a bonus action. And 3rd level, that's pretty powerful. Like, that could potentially be doubling the number of attacks you're making. So, I mean, if you're attacking recklessly, so you've already got advantage, let's say that you, you've got decent strength, you're using a great weapon, we'll assume, doubling those attacks is pretty powerful. And at 5th level, it's still going to be an extra 33% of your attacks, essentially, at least past the 1st round, right? Because the 1st round, you're going to have to rage. 2nd round, you'll be able to start using Frenzy. And like I said, that's a lot of extra damage. Especially when you start getting to higher levels, you start maxing out your strength, you start taking feats, like maybe you have Great Weapon Mastery and you're using Reckless Attack. So now you're just doing that extra plus 10 damage every hit. That starts becoming a significant amount of damage. And you could be making, you know, 3 attacks around in any of the key battles that you choose as early as level 5. You know, a fighter's not looking at that until level 11. I mean, sure, they could action surge, but that's once per short rest. Now, Frenzy might only be once per short rest, or once per long rest, right? I mean, honestly, that's probably the best way to do it. But it is going to last for that entire combat, not just one round like the fighter. I'd still say Action Surge is probably better, let's be honest. Action Surge is an amazing ability. But I don't think the Frenzy is as bad as people make it sound. You can choose to enter a Frenzy or just a regular rage. You do not have to use Frenzy every time you rage. And so I think a lot of these people talking about how they like exhaust their characters to death or almost to death or whatever, that just doesn't happen in real gaming situations. Nobody's deliberately stacking that up. Now maybe you've got some sort of environmental condition where everybody's suffering levels of exhaustion, in which case Frenzy becomes even more useless because you're like, hey, you know, I've already got exhaustion problems to worry about. I cannot afford to be dealing with this. And I don't necessarily think that this is the best designed ability in the game. Like, let's be honest. If it was a saving throw of some sort, like a Constitution saving throw to avoid exhaustion, maybe. If it was a different trade-off entirely, you know, like, I think that might not be so bad. But the fact that you need to do a long rest in order to get rid of the level of exhaustion does really limit this ability to basically like a 1 time per day, or even less maybe, type of event. But, you know, if you're in the big boss fight, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing ever. So anyways, let's move on to Mindless Rage. Beginning at 6th level, you can't be charmed or frightened while raging. If you are charmed or frightened when you enter your rage, the effect is suspended for the duration of the rage. So, I actually like this ability quite a bit. Charmed and frightened are pretty common conditions, and the fact that you just don't have to worry about those while you're raging is really good. Because if you've played a Barbarian before, you probably realize that one of the worst feelings is when you enter your rage and then for some reason that rage gets just canceled out or ended prematurely, right? Especially if it was your teammates that caused it to happen. But anything that ends your rage is just kind of annoying, you know? So the fact that, you know, you don't have to worry about like frightened conditions especially is a really big benefit. Now the second half is a little confusing to me. I probably should have looked this up. I'm sure that Wizard of the Coast has probably, you know, tweeted about it or something. But it says if you're charmed or frightened when you enter your rage, the effect is suspended for the duration of the rage. I've seen some people who treat this as though you could just be charmed or frightened and then choose to enter rage to cancel it like retroactively. I don't think that's supposed to be how it's done. But given that the Berserker Barbarian already gets a lot of hate, I probably wouldn't be opposed to letting a player do that, to be honest. But I don't think that's how it's supposed to be. At level 10, you get Intimidating Presence. So you can frighten someone with your menacing presence. When you do so, choose one creature that you can see within 30 feet of you. If the creature can see or hear you, it must succeed on a Wisdom saving throw. DC is equal to 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your charisma modifier, which is probably not great, let's be honest. Or be frightened of you until the end of your next turn. On subsequent turns, you can use your action to extend the duration of this on the frightened creature until the end of your next turn. This effect ends if the creature ends its turn out of line of sight or more than 60 feet away from you. If the creature succeeds on its saving throw, you can't use the feature on that creature again for 24 hours. I have a couple problems with this one. Number one, the fact that it uses your charisma. You probably don't have a great charisma as a barbarian. You're already worrying about strength and con and probably a bit of dex, maybe even, you know, maybe even some wisdom even. Charisma is probably your last concern, that and intelligence. So, that kind of sucks. I do know, though, that in Critical Role, if for anybody who's watched that, Matt Mercer allowed their Path of the Berserker Barbarian to use his strength instead of charisma, which makes a lot of sense to me. Your barbarian is not trying to do this by just like making a well-worded argument or anything like that. Like, yeah, maybe he's using his physical presence, so that's why it's charisma. But he's mostly just trying to be intimidating and frightening. And I think that using strength makes way more sense. And it would definitely fit the theme and the kit of the barbarian a lot more. Especially the berserker. Like, you know, it just seems like a lot more sensible choice. However, even if you do allow a player to use strength instead, I don't know that this is a great ability. It takes your action to use. If it was a bonus action or something, I might not have as much of a problem with it. But I mean, if you're not really going to use it in combat that much, I don't think, because like you could just smash somebody with your great axe a bunch of times instead. You know, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that it's a great ability. Like I think that leaving the frightening type abilities up to the casters is probably just going to be more effective in general, right? Especially if you're using charisma to try to do it. And the fact that you can give up your action in subsequent rounds to extend the effect. But I mean, I don't know. To me, that's just not really what the Barbarian is there to do. I think out of combat, to try to use it like an interrogation scene to intimidate somebody, that could be really cool. But in combat, I don't know. I think anything that's worth fearing is probably going to be immune to fear, and anything that's not immune to fear, you can probably just kill with your axe. So I don't know. I have some real problems with that ability. At level 14, though, you get retaliation. That's when you take damage from a creature that's within 5 feet of you. You can use your reaction to make a melee weapon attack against that creature. This ability, in my opinion, is amazing. I've seen some people complain about it, though, which really surprised me. I saw somebody said it was basically just a glorified attack of opportunity. And I'm like, no, attack of opportunity is way less common than your barbarian just getting attacked. Like, you're getting attacked constantly as a barbarian. Attacks of opportunity, you have no control over whether or not that's going to happen, but you can control whether or not you throw yourself right up into the front line, right next to the big bad thing that's trying to cleave everybody down, because he either attacks you or he doesn't. And if he doesn't, you're just going to kill him eventually. And if he does attack you, you're going to get to kill him even faster with Retaliate. And I think this ability is excellent. It's basically just a way to use your reaction for just more damage. And let's face it, that's kind of what the path of the Berserker is all about. It's just doing more damage for the most part. And I think that using a reaction to do that is a perfect solution. So even if you're not using Frenzy, let's leave Frenzy aside for a moment. This means that by level 14, you can be using your multi-attacks, or 2 attacks a round pretty consistently, and getting in a 3rd attack pretty much every round, really, from your reaction attack with retaliation, which is pretty staggeringly good. Especially, again, if you're able to use things like Great Weapon Mastery and just really ramp up that damage on things. So personally, I think it's a great ability. I really like it because it just gives you that like extra source of damage. And as a barbarian, you don't have like counterspell, you don't have shield, you don't have a lot of these other like really high value reaction abilities that you need to be like looking out for. You really don't have a lot that's using a reaction. So this is the perfect solution. You made a character who wants to do lots of damage and hit stuff really hard. Now you've got a way of doing it that uses your reaction and gives you even more like action economy. So I think retaliation is an excellent ability. I mean, if you're in like the fight with the big boss and you decide, let's say, to use your frenzy, you could be attacking 4 times around fairly consistently. It's also worth pointing out that it just says the guy has to deal damage to you and be within 5 feet of you. It doesn't say he has to attack you with a melee attack. So you could have like yourself and say a paladin, both up on the front line fighting a dragon. The dragon breathes fire and hits both of you, right? You can use retaliation and hit the dragon back. Even if he's trying to focus down the paladin with his like other attacks, and he just uses a legendary action and breathes fire on you, and the DM deliberately attacks the paladin, knowing that you're hoping to retaliate on it. You know? And you're like, ah, oh, man, why isn't he attacking me? And the DM's just like, oh, because he chose the paladin. No retaliation for you. And then he breathes fire, and you're like, oh, no, I'm standing right next to the dragon, retaliate. It's like, oh, no, he didn't attack you. Oh, he doesn't have to. He just has to damage me with an attack, within 5 feet of me. So, you know, I think that's a great ability. So, oh, let's talk about exhaustion, now that I put the book away. Fortunately, I still have exhaustion marked. All right, so obviously if you're going to be frenzying a lot, you're going to get levels of exhaustion. So 1 level isn't so bad, disadvantage on ability checks. But it is worth pointing out that initiative is a dexterity check. So you will have disadvantage on initiative checks. Now, that does get countered by barbarian class abilities, but even still, you probably don't want disadvantage on anything if you can help it, right? Especially not initiative, because that's kind of what you're trying to do. You're trying to hit things hard and fast. 2 levels of exhaustion, speed halved. 3 levels, disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws. Now again, you can counter this with reckless attack, with the attack rolls at least, but it's not great. Level 4, hit point maximum halved. Now it's kind of funny, this is also kind of countered by raging because you effectively double your hit points. But again, this is not great. You know, you don't want to get up to 4 levels of exhaustion. Level 5, speed reduced to 0. Yeah. And level 6, death. Which at this point is probably merciful because speed reduced to 0 is so horrible. So basically any levels of exhaustion are terrible. And of course, they stack, right? It's not like you just progressed from 1 to 2 and now you lost those level 1 abilities. They're all building up on top of each other. And taking a long rest only removes 1 level of exhaustion. So it's not like you could be stacking up like 3 levels and then a long rest and you'll be good again to do it again tomorrow. You really, really have to be very careful with the way you use your frenzies because you don't really want more than 1 level. And especially if you have like environmental conditions that are also causing levels of exhaustion, this can be really, really bad. So again, I don't know that trading an extra bonus action attack for levels of exhaustion is always worth it. That is a high cost to pay. And I do kind of, like, there are some house rules where people give the barbarian like a saving throw against the exhaustion, or where they just like trade it for something else. They say, okay, you can only use it once per day, but there is no exhaustion. You can do it once per long rest. I've seen those kind of house rules. I think that those aren't necessarily bad options, to be honest. But, you know, as written, it is a pretty steep cost. But I do think that once you start getting a bunch of feats and you start getting your ability scores really high, you get, you know, maybe you've got a magic axe that's also, you know, it's like a flame tongue greatsword or something like that that you're using, right? So you've got your greatsword and you're doing your 2d6 damage, but it's also doing fire damage on top of that. And you've got great weapon mastery, and your strength is like maxed out at 20 and eventually 24 if you get all the way to level 20. You know, you're hitting so hard that getting in an extra attack starts like really ramping up the amount of damage, right? And then if you're using retaliation on top of that, you can be attacking that boss 4 times around at level 14. You know, fighter doesn't get 4 attacks until 20, and he's the only guy that's going to get more than you. So there are some definite upsides, but, you know, the downsides are crippling. So I do think that it's a class that really, I feel like it just needed a little bit of tweaking here and there to make it a little better. But I do think that as is, it's still pretty fun and pretty playable. I know that Troy had a lot of fun playing his barbarian. His barbarian was really like just one of the best characters in that whole campaign, along with my fighter, of course, who was also awesome. They were just like 2 peas of a pod. They just both loved killing things, and that's what they did. But, you know, like I said, they are very, very effective. And if you're just looking to make like a combat machine character, then it's a pretty solid choice. So as far as like ways to try to get the most out of it, I really think things like great weapon mastery are an excellent feat. It's good on anybody who wants to use great weapons, but it's especially good if you have a way of compensating for that -5 hit penalty, which barbarians have innately, basically, with just using reckless attack. And, you know, stacking up those damage bonuses on top of just hitting more and more often is just great. Barbarians can just cleave down powerful enemies way faster than you expect a lot of times. Like, there are times when running fights that I'd have to, like, you know, have to really go into this fight, like, looking at the numbers and thinking, like, okay, if they use none of their abilities, this is going to be a close fight. If they use all their abilities, they're just going to crush this guy. And so I'd have to be like, you know what, like, we need to up the difficulty in this fight in order to make it a challenge. And, you know, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe they don't use their abilities and then they almost die. Maybe they don't have any abilities left because they just had a horrific run of luck at one point. You never know, right? These things happen. And so they had to use those abilities early on. But for the most part, I think that a barbarian who's deciding to, like, just drop frenzies and just stack levels of exhaustion is just not a well-played barbarian, probably. Most players just inherently seem to realize that, yeah, I'm going to use this as like my end-of-day fight move, get those extra attacks, get in all those that extra damage, and, you know, then I'm going to long rest, so there's really no consequence to it. I think that things like mobility are a good feat for barbarians as well, just adding even more movement, because it makes it just much more likely you're going to be able to, like, stay in combat and stuff, right? I don't mind the sentinel feat as well, just as an extra way of, like, maintaining, you know, some extra damage and stuff like that. It can be really good combined with, you know, things like, say, retaliation, where now if they attack you, you get to attack, but if they don't attack you, you can still attack. The only thing I would be concerned about with the barbarian is that I really, really want to max my strength, and I really want to max my constitution if I think the campaign is going to go all the way to 20. Because your capstone is one of the most insane capstones in the entire game. Raising your strength and con by 4 each, as well as raising the caps on them, you know, you could have 24 in both categories. And that is ridiculous. So I kind of feel like I want to be able to take advantage of that and make sure that my strength and con are both going to be maxed. And honestly, those are just great stats for me to max anyway. Now, maybe I go for Great Weapon Mastery first and then max everything else, you know, whatever. Maybe I max strength, then grab Great Weapon Mastery or mobile, whatever. The one thing I would be concerned about, you are not a fighter. You do not have a bunch of bonus feats, you know, so you do not have the luxury of, like, Pull-on Mastery, Sentinel, Great Weapon Mastery, you know, and just stacking all these feats up on top of each other if you still want to max your stats. Now, maybe you don't, right? I mean, taking something like Pull-on Mastery on a Barbarian is a great way to get a bonus action attack in, and then you don't feel like you have to even take the Path of the Berserker, because you're like, well, I don't need the bonus action attack. I've got Pull-on Mastery. But one nice thing about the Path of the Berserker is that it gives you a good, solid bonus action attack without it costing you a feat. And like I said, there are trade-offs. We've talked about that already in this video. I'm not trying to say that it's just the best subclass in the game or anything like that. But I do think that there are a lot of ways to really enjoy the class and to get the most out of it. And mostly, it just requires you to, like, just use your frenzies strategically. Because like I said, you don't have to frenzy every time you rage. You know, you can just rage usually without frenzying. And, you know, that's fine. I think that overall, it's still a pretty fun class to play. It's very, very effective at dealing lots of damage. And if that's what you mostly want to do, I think that the Path of the Berserker is a solid choice. I don't think it's the best subclass mechanically. I don't think that, you know, exhaustion is necessarily the best trade-off all the time for an extra attack. But I also don't think that it's the worst thing you could be doing, and that it's a trap class, and that by taking this, you're ruining your character and screwing over the entire campaign, or any of the other, like, frankly, ridiculous claims that I've seen a lot of people make. It's definitely not to that degree. Anything in this game is playable, in my opinion. That's one of the big strengths of 5th edition. I think the classes are all pretty good. Some are better than others, of course, because you've got so many classes and so many subclasses that it just stands to reason that something was going to be better than something else. That's just life, right? But none of them are absolutely terrible, in my opinion, including the Path of the Berserker Barbarian. So anyways, those are my thoughts on it. I'm probably starting to ramble a little too much, so I think we're going to end the video there. But feel free to like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Hit the bell for notifications. And of course, mostly, as I always say, leave your comments in the comment section. And I'm sure to read every single one of them. Thank you.